Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, let your mind travel far from the spreading branches of the baobab to a different kind of sanctuary in the deep desert. Journey with me, west, across the vast, shimmering expanse of the Libyan desert. We're heading for a place where the endless gold of the dunes is broken by a sudden, impossible splash of green. This is Siwa. It's an oasis cradled in a depression below sea level. A secret whispered by the earth, where water bubbles up from impossible depths and life flourishes in defiant abundance. Imagine being there right now. The air is heavy with the sweet, dusty scent of ripening dates and the mineral tang of ancient springs. The sound isn't the familiar hiss of wind over sand, but a soft, perpetual rustling. It's the sound of countless palm fronds swaying in a gentle breeze. This sound is the first clue. In Siwa, the trees don't just provide shade and fruit. They speak. They remember. They hold accounts. In a world where the desert teaches the fragility of all things, the people of Siwa developed a form of memory as enduring as the bedrock beneath them. They didn't write their history on papyrus, which crumbles, or on parchment, which burns. They inscribed it into the living skin of their date palms. For centuries, the wealth of families, their debts, their assets, their water rights, their inheritances wasn't tracked in ledgers kept in chests, but in a vast, open-air library of green. Each family had its tree. Each transaction became a mark, a notch, a symbol carefully cut into a chosen frond by a revered figure. The Hassan, the date palm accountant. He was not a mere clerk, but a botanist priest of numbers, a keeper of stories written in leaf and scar. Tonight, we will explore this singular system. We will walk through the shaded frond library, where the rustle of leaves is the sound of centuries of commerce and covenant. We'll learn the delicate mathematics of water, measured not in liters, but in the width of fingers and the flow of minutes, all recorded in living tally marks. We will witness a great fire that consumed the physical records, only to reveal that the true archive was not in the trees themselves, but in the perfectly aligned memories of the community that tended them. And finally, in a bittersweet modern encounter, we will sit with the last Hassan as he teaches his art to software developers. We'll watch a living, breathing knowledge being translated into the silent, cold light of a screen. This is a story about where we choose to place our trust. In ink or in sap, in servers or in stems. It is about a system where your wealth grew, quite literally, on a tree right outside your home. Changing with the seasons, aging with your lineage. It's about understanding that the most reliable database might just be one that requires shade, water, and the respectful attention of a human hand-to-hand that knows the difference between a cut that records a loan of dates and one that seals a marriage dowry. As we begin, let us imagine the cool, damp earth of the oasis, the rustling canopy high above, and the slow, deliberate hands of the accountant turning life into living geometry. Let's pause for a moment. The fire crackles gently as the night breathes around us. In the distance, try to imagine that softer sound, the whisper of 10,000 palm leaves, each one a potential page in the great green book of Siwa. Welcome back to our journey through the hidden wonders of history. Today, we're venturing deep into the heart of the Egyptian desert, to the remote Siwa Oasis. Here, amidst the shimmering sands and endless sky, a unique and beautiful system of finance and history-keeping flourished for centuries. A system where the bank was a living tree, the currency was memory, and the accountant was a scholar of scars. By the end of our time together, you'll understand how a simple date palm became more than a tree in Siwa. It transformed into a living bank, a historical archive, and a sacred testament to a family's journey through time, all curated by the revered figure of the Hassan. Imagine an oasis, a jewel of green in a sea of gold. Life here is precious. Resources are carefully managed, and trust is the most valuable commodity. In Siwa, this trust was literally carved into the landscape. The heart of this system was a special grove. Not just any cluster of trees, but a specific, sheltered area known to all as the Hadakat al-Hassan, the Garden of the Accountant. This wasn't a public park or a commercial farm. It was a sacred space. Here, the palms grew taller, their shade deeper, their trunks thicker with the wisdom of age. Each and every tree in this remarkable grove was assigned to a Siwan family, a covenant stretching back for generations, a living link to their ancestors. This assignment was never random. Think about it. When a new family established itself in the oasis, perhaps centuries ago, a new life was planted in their name. A young, vibrant palm sapling was placed in the soil of the Hadakat al-Hassan. From that day forward, the tree and the family were intertwined. They grew together. The health of the palm was seen as a reflection of the family's own well-being. Its fruit, the sweet, life-giving dates, nourished them, and its fronds, the long, elegant leaves, held their economic soul. This wasn't just agriculture. It was a living, breathing ledger, a testament to a community deeply connected to its environment. The garden was a library where every book was a tree and every page was a leaf, telling a story of survival, trade, and kinship. Now, who was the keeper of this incredible living library? This brings us to the Hassan, the guardian of the grove. The title of Hassan, meaning accountant, doesn't quite capture the depth of his role. He was a historian, a mediator, and the moral compass of the community. His position was hereditary, passed down from father to the most patient, detail-minded son. This wasn't a role one could simply apply for. It required a specific temperament, an innate ability to see the world in patterns and details that others might miss. The Hassan was not a merchant, driven by profit, nor was he a farmer, focused solely on the harvest. He was something else entirely. He was a scholar of scars. His tools were deceptively simple, yet perfectly suited to his craft. He carried a small, sharp, curved knife, its bone handle polished smooth by generations of use, feeling like an extension of his own hand. For quick calculations or temporary tallies, he might use a string of clay beads, clicking them through his fingers as he cross-referenced debts and credits. But his most powerful tool was his mind, a mind that could hold the complex, interwoven web of the entire oasis's transactions, a vast mental map of who owed what to whom, stretching back decades, even centuries. His authority was absolute and unquestioned. Why? Because he was the neutral third party, bound not by allegiance to any single family, but to the unassailable truth of the cuts he made in the palm fronds. His integrity was the bedrock of the entire system. Imagine the Hassan on his daily walk through the grove. This was not a casual stroll. He wasn't just there to tend to the trees in the traditional sense. He was there to read. He would approach a palm, its trunk a column of recorded history, and run his weathered fingers over the notches on a dry, brown frond. To an outsider, it would look like random damage. To the Hassan, it was a perfectly legible sentence. He could touch the marks and recount a transaction from 50 years prior with startling clarity. He might murmur to a young apprentice, "This small, deep cut here. Ah yes, this was when the Al-Mahdi family borrowed 3 sacks of barley from the Al-Zaini family. It was in the lean year after the great sandstorm that buried half the western fields. And see this lighter, shallower mark right next to it. That is the repayment made to harvests later, with an extra sack given not as interest, but for kindness." Every mark told a story, not just of economics, but of human relationships, of hardship and generosity, of community resilience. The fronds were a chronicle of life itself. The language carved into them was incredibly nuanced and sophisticated. It was a system developed over centuries, perfected through practice. A notch made on the left rib of a frond, for instance, might indicate a debt incurred. A matching notch, carved on the right rib, signified that the debt had been paid. The system was balanced, a visual representation of equilibrium. The depth of the cut itself held meaning. A deep gouge might represent a significant loan, like that of a prized donkey, essential for transport and farming. A shallow, delicate scratch could denote something smaller, a basket of olives or a bundle of herbs. But it went even further. Specific symbols, small and geometric, were carved to represent different commodities. This was a true writing system. A tiny, precise diamond could be the symbol for water rights, the most precious resource in the desert. A perfect circle might stand for a block of salt, harvested from the nearby salt lakes and a vital trade good. A wavy line, flowing like fabric, could represent a loan of cloth brought by a passing caravan. Each commodity had its own unique sign, ensuring there was no ambiguity. The system was robust, clear, and understood by everyone, even if only the Hassan could read its most intricate details. It was a testament to human ingenuity, creating a complex financial system without a single piece of paper or a single coin. Perhaps the most beautiful and ingenious aspect of this entire system was its temporality. Its built-in clock, a new transaction, a fresh debt, or a new agreement was always recorded on a young, green frond near the tree's heart, close to its growing center. This was the present. As the seasons passed, that frond would mature, turning from green to yellow, then from yellow to a deep, brittle brown. Over years, it would naturally droop downwards, pressing against the trunk with the other old fronds, becoming part of the tree's armored skirt. It was now part of the permanent, physical archive. The past was never erased. It was simply layered, preserved in chronological order. So, to read a family's full economic and social history, the Hassan would perform a kind of vertical archaeology. He would start at the bottom, examining the outer brownest fronds, the ancient past. His fingers would trace the stories of great-grandparents, of droughts and bounties long gone. Then his eyes and hands would move inward and upward, following the spiral of the fronds toward the tree's green, vibrant heart. He was moving through time, from the distant past to the immediate present, reading the vertical story of a family's fortunes, their struggles, their triumphs, and their enduring place within the Siwan community. The tree was not just a bank, it was a biography, a family tree in the most literal sense, with its story written on every leaf. This remarkable tradition shows us that the most sophisticated technologies are often born from a deep understanding of nature, and that a community's greatest wealth is its shared history and trust. To truly understand the heart of this system, we must witness a transaction. Let's journey back in time to the oasis of Siwa and imagine a simple, everyday trade. Picture Ahmad. Her family's olive grove has been generous this season, and she has a surplus of rich, fragrant olive oil. But she has a need. Her daughter is to be married, and a wedding dress requires the finest linen. For this, everyone knows you go to Sister Fatima, a weaver whose hands create the most beautiful cloth in the entire oasis. Ahmed approaches Fatima, perhaps at the market, or visits her at her home where the rhythmic clatter of the loom fills the air. They discuss the exchange. Ahmed presents her oil, smooth and golden, in a clay jar. Fatima unfurls a length of her linen, cool and soft to the touch. After some friendly negotiation, they agree. 5 jars of Ahmad's finest olive oil for 2 lengths of Fatima's best summer weight linen. Now, in many other cultures, this agreement might be sealed with a handshake. Perhaps a simple verbal promise, "I will bring the oil next week." In a more modern setting, a contract would be scribbled on paper. But this is Siwa, and their way is different. It is deeper, more connected to the land itself. Instead of shaking hands and parting ways, Ahmed and Sister Fatima walk together. Their destination is the heart of the community's economic and spiritual life. The Hadakat al-Husan, the grove of the keeper. They find the Hassan, the hereditary keeper of this living ledger, in the dappled shade of the towering date palms. He might be tending to a water channel, his hands covered in the dark, rich earth, or perhaps sharpening his tools. He is a figure of immense respect, a guardian of memory and trust. The two women approach him with deference. They state their agreement clearly and formally. Ahmed speaks of the 5 jars of oil, and Fatima confirms the 2 lengths of linen. The terms are now public, spoken aloud in this sacred space. The Hassan listens intently, his gaze steady, nodding to show he understands. He doesn't write in a book or on a scroll. His ledger is the grove itself. He leads them first to a palm tree designated to Sister Fatima's family, a tree that has borne witness to generations of her family's agreements and exchanges. He carefully selects a healthy, mature frond, one that is neither too young and soft nor too old and brittle. It has to be just right to hold the record for years to come. With a small, razor-sharp knife that seems like an extension of his own hand, he makes a precise, angled notch on the left side of the frond's central rib. The cut is clean, deliberate. A tiny, clear bead of sap wells up along the edge of the mark, like a tear or a drop of dew. As he makes the cut, the Hassan speaks, his voice clear and resonant. For the record of all who are present, and for the memory of the grove itself, he declares, this cut marks a debt. To the house of Ahmed, from the house of Fatima. 5 jars of the autumn press. The debt is now recorded. It is tangible, etched into living tissue. But the transaction has 2 sides. He then turns and walks them to the palm tree belonging to Ahmed's family. He finds a frond of similar age and vitality. On this frond, he makes a different kind of mark. This one is on the right side of the rib, and it is not a simple notch. It is a symbol delicately carved into the green flesh, a small, intricate loom shuttle, the tool of Fatima's trade. Again, he announces the meaning of the mark. This marks a credit to the house of Ahmed from the house of Fatima, to lengths of summer linen to be received. The transaction is now complete. It is immortalized. It has become a part of the natural world, a living record that will grow and age with the tree itself. When the time comes, and Fatima delivers the beautifully woven linen to Ahmed's family, the process will be completed. The Hassan will be summoned once more. He will return to Fatima's family palm, find the exact same frond, and make a new, matching notch on the right side of the rib, directly opposite the first one. This closes the debt, creating a symmetrical symbol of a promise fulfilled. Then, he will go to Ahmed's tree and, with a single, deft slice, add a small dash through the carved loom shuttle, marking the credit as received and the account as settled. This remarkable process transformed commerce from a private, often untraceable act into a public, biological ritual. The trees themselves became the silent, ever-present witnesses to the community's promises. The Hassan was not just a bookkeeper, he was a scribe, a mediator, and a gardener of trust. The system was a powerful deterrent to fraud. After all, who would dare to alter or falsify a mark on a living tree? In a sacred grove, under the watchful eyes of the entire community and its trusted keeper, it would be unthinkable, a violation not just of law, but of nature and spirit. This system also baked the dimension of time directly into the record. Imagine walking through the grove years later. You could look at a frond and see the history of an agreement. If you saw an open debt notch from 5 years ago, now surrounded by the scars of newer, closed notches, you would immediately understand a story. A story of delay, perhaps of hardship that prevented repayment, or maybe a dispute that was never resolved. The record wasn't static ink on a page. It was a living narrative written in scar tissue on a growing organism. The size and weathering of the notch told you its age. Its position among other marks told a story of a family's economic life. The Hassan's role was complex. To manage this vast, decentralized library of agreements, he maintained his own master index. On a single, ancient palm belonging to his own family, he carved a series of master symbols. Each symbol corresponded to a family or a major contract, acting as a quick reference, pointing him to which trees held significant or ongoing agreements. This allowed him to navigate the hundreds, perhaps thousands, of records spread throughout the grove with an expert's ease. Let's just pause for a moment here. Close your eyes and try to picture the solemnity of that moment in the grove. Imagine the sounds, the gentle crackle of a small fire nearby, the whisper of the wind through the palm fronds, the quiet breathing of the desert night. Then the distinct, crisp, snick of the Hassan's knife cutting into the frond. Imagine the smell of freshly cut vegetation, of damp earth, of the faint, sweet scent of palm sap. Feel the weight of that moment, the gravity of a promise being given a physical, living, growing form. This wasn't just business. This was commerce as an act of gardening, an agreement rooted in the earth, reaching for the sun. This system bound the people not only to each other, but to their environment. A family's honor and their economic standing were tied directly to the health of their designated tree. A blight or a storm that damaged a family's palm tree could, in a very real sense, damage their credit history. The grove was more than a collection of trees. It was the community's collective memory, its bank, its courthouse, and its temple, all in one. Every notch, every symbol, was a testament to a relationship, a story of need and provision, of promise and fulfillment. It was a system built on visibility, accountability, and a deep, profound respect for the natural world that sustained them. It reminds us that our systems of value and exchange don't have to be cold and abstract. They can be as alive, as beautiful, and as deeply rooted as a forest. We often think that the ultimate test of any system for keeping records, whether it's a filing cabinet or a complex digital database, is how well it stores information. But that's only half the story. The real challenge, the true measure of its worth, lies in retrieval and, more importantly, in adjudication. How do you use those records to settle disputes fairly and definitively? In the ancient oasis of Siwa, tucked away in the Egyptian desert, they had an answer that was as elegant as it was profound. When a disagreement arose, maybe a fight over an inheritance, a confusion about the terms of a loan made years ago, or a boundary dispute between two families over a precious parcel of land, the process of resolution didn't start with shouting matches or heated arguments. It began with a quiet, deliberate walk. All the parties involved, along with respected community elders, would make their way to the sacred palm grove. They would approach the keeper of this living archive, the man known as the Hassan. In the cool shade of the date palms, they would state their cases, one by one. The Hassan would listen, his face a mask of calm neutrality, absorbing every detail without interruption. Once everyone had spoken, he wouldn't offer an immediate judgment. Instead, he would turn and lead them deeper into the grove, his footsteps silent on the sandy soil until he reached the specific family palm. or palms, that held the key to the dispute. The trial, you see, was about to be held. Not in a stuffy room, but right there, amidst the quiet rustle of the palm fronds. Imagine this scene. A son stands before the Hassan, his voice earnest. He claims his father, now passed, had promised him a particular plot of irrigated land near the eastern spring. It was a verbal promise made on the day of his wedding. But his uncle, the father's brother, shakes his head. He disputes the claim, arguing the land was meant to be shared equally among all the sons. There's no written will, no deed, just one man's memory against another's. The Hassan doesn't ask for witnesses. He doesn't encourage further debate. He simply goes to the family palm that belonged to the deceased father. With a gentle, practiced hand, he pulls aside the layers of dry, hanging fronds the archived chapters of the man's entire life. His fingers search, moving back through the seasons, until he finds the specific frond from the year of the son's marriage. And there, etched into the fibrous surface, among the various notches and symbols representing wedding gifts given and received, and the expenses for the celebratory feast, is a small, distinct carving. It's a perfect square with a single dot in its center. This was the universally recognized symbol for a garden plot. East Spring. Right next to this symbol is another, simpler mark, a shallow, vertical cut. The sign for the first son. The Hassan traces the carvings with his fingertip. He turns to the assembled family, his voice soft but carrying the weight of unshakable authority. See, he says, the intention was here, in the green. It was recorded when the promise was fresh in his heart and the sap was fresh in the leaf. The uncle looks closely at the mark. He recognizes the style, a record made at his own brother's request decades ago. He bows his head in acceptance. The evidence is irrefutable. This wasn't a contest of conflicting memories. It was the clear, unambiguous testimony of the tree itself, scribed by a neutral hand at the very moment the promise was made. This was the supreme power of the Siwa system. It took memory, something so personal, so subjective, and prone to distortion over time, and anchored it to an objective, biological artifact. The Hassan wasn't offering his opinion or interpreting a vague statement. He was simply translating a text that was older than the dispute itself. He was reading history directly from the source. With this method, the Hassan could reconstruct the entire financial history of a family. He could point to fronds from seasons of great prosperity, indicated by many closed notches on the right side, signifying assets and completed transactions. He could also identify times of struggle and hardship, marked by clusters of debt notches on the left side of the fronds, some showing the slow process of repayment over several seasons. Several fronds. The palm was more than just a financial ledger. It was a moral one. The Hassan could even see acts of forgiveness and generosity. A debt notch that was closed, not with a standard payment mark, but with a special circular symbol of completion, indicated that the debt had been forgiven by the lender. It was a permanent record of a family's character, their struggles, their generosity, their commitments. The palm chronicled not just what they had, but who they were. The lines and notches told a story that went far deeper than mere accounting. Perhaps the most profound and essential readings were for inheritances. When a family patriarch passed away, the community could have been torn apart by conflict over his estate. Instead, the Hassan would come and spend days, sometimes even weeks, with the family palm. It was a meticulous and sacred process. He would read out the entire estate, frond by frond, season by season. He would account for every open debt and every outstanding credit. He would identify every symbol for propertia, particular grove, a house, a share in a welland to whom it had been promised. He would detail every obligation the family had to others, and every obligation owed to them. His final summation was the last word. There was no room for argument. There were no hidden wills to be discovered, no lost documents to be argued over. The will was the tree. It had been written incrementally, publicly, over the course of a lifetime, under the watchful eye of the entire community and its designated keeper. To contest the Hassan's reading of the palm was to contest reality itself. It was like arguing with the sun for rising in the east. This remarkable process ensured smooth transitions of wealth and responsibility. It prevented the bitter, fratricidal conflicts that have torn apart so many families throughout history, and it cemented the palm tree's role in the heart of the community. It wasn't just a record keeper. It was the silent, enduring head of the household, holding the family's collective memory long after its individual members had passed on. Let's just pause for a moment here. Imagine it. The desert night is setting in. Maybe a small fire is crackling nearby, casting dancing shadows. The air is still and cool. Imagine the deep, reverent silence of that palm grove during an inheritance reading. The only sound is the soft whisper of the wind through the fronds and the Hassan's quiet, steady voice explaining the meaning of the scars and symbols on the tree. This is justice emerging not from a gavel in a courtroom, but from the slow, patient, living grammar of a tree. It was a system where the law, quite literally, grew on you. It was a part of the landscape, a part of the cycle of life, death, and seasons. The community placed its trust not in fallible human memory or in documents that could be forged or lost, but in the unyielding integrity of nature, guided by a trusted human hand. It speaks to a wisdom we've perhaps lost, a deep connection between human society and the natural world that sustained it. A world where truth was rooted in the earth itself. In the heart of the vast, sun-scorched desert, a truth rings clear. All wealth, all life, all power is merely a derivative of one fundamental asset, water. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the Siwa Oasis, a verdant jewel sustained by miraculous springs and a fragile, life-giving aquifer. Here, water isn't just a resource, it's a sacred trust. A liquid genealogy flowing through generations, connecting the past to the present and nurturing the future. The entire kingdom, its lush gardens and towering palms, is kept alive by a complex network of irrigation channels known as athli. This is the oasis's circulatory system, carrying life to every corner. In a place like Siwa, simply owning a piece of land is almost meaningless. Its value is theoretical, a patch of sand and dust. True wealth comes from owning the right to the water that makes that land live. And so, the most crucial, the most intricate work in the entire community wasn't tracking harvests of dates or bolts of cloth. It was accounting for the flow of time itself, the precious minutes and hours of water directed to specific plots of land, turning barren ground into a paradise. Imagine a currency that you can't see or hold, a form of wealth that exists only as a measure of time and flow. These were the water rights of Siwa. They were ancient, passed down through families, inherited and subdivided over countless generations. A single family might own the right to 2 hours of flow from the mother spring every Tuesday and Friday. Another might possess 30 minutes from a smaller secondary spring, but their turn comes every single day at the break of dawn. These rights were as real as any property. They could be leased out for a season to a neighbor in need. They could be offered as part of a dowry, uniting families not just in marriage, but in shared sustenance. And in times of absolute desperation, they could be sold. A heart-wrenching decision that meant parting with a piece of one's heritage. Managing this invisible, temporal currency was a monumental task. It demanded a form of mathematics of exquisite precision, combined with a profound, almost spiritual intimacy with the land's hydrology. And at the center of this entire system stood a figure of immense importance and respect. The Hassan was the keeper of the water, the accountant of time. He held this complex mathematics not just in his mind, but in his very being. He knew the gradient of every single channel, understanding how a slight change in slope could speed or slow the water's journey. He knew which sluice gates were sticky and required a firmer hand, and which opened with a gentle touch. More than that, his body was his primary measuring instrument. He could feel how the flow changed, how it slowed in the cool of the night compared to the heat of the midday sun. The standard unit for the depth of the water wasn't a ruler or a stick. It was the finger width, a simple, intuitive measure understood by all. And the standard unit for time was often something beautifully poetic, the frond notch. This created a perfect link between the measure itself and the medium used for recording it. One notch carved into a dried palm frond might represent a standard unit of flow time, perhaps 5 minutes of water from a primary channel. But this system was anything but rigid. It was alive, just like the water it measured. The Hassan's true genius lay in his ability to calibrate this system based on the living reality of the oasis. This wasn't an abstract science based on fixed numbers. It was an art based on observation and feeling. Each year, during a ceremony known as the water unveiling, the community would gather. The springs would be cleaned of the year's debris, and the main channels would be ceremonially reopened. This was the moment for the Hassan to perform his most sacred duty. He would kneel by the main channel, the freshly released water rushing past. He would place his hand into the current, his fingers spread, feeling its push and pull against his skin. He was reading the water. Through the pressure on his palm and the speed of the flow against his fingers, he was gauging the health of the aquifer, the strength of the springs for the coming year. After a period of intense concentration, he might rise and announce to the waiting community, "The current is strong this year. A notch will be 7 minutes of flow, not 5. Or, in a drier year, the time might be reduced." The system was fluid, adaptive, always reflecting the true state of their shared resource. It was a system built on the living pulse of the earth, not on unchanging laws written in a book. This adaptive precision was the key to the system's fairness and its genius. A family's water share wasn't a fixed volume, like 1,000 gallons. It was a share of the total available flow for a specific period. Think about what that means. If the springs were strong and the aquifer was full, everyone's notches of time brought them more water. The entire community prospered together. But if the springs were weak and the water level dropped, everyone's share shrank proportionally. No single family bore the brunt of a dry season. The risk and the bounty of the natural world were shared equitably among all. It was a system designed for resilience, for community survival. The Hassan was the guarantor of this delicate proportionality. He was the human instrument through which the oasis balanced its most precious account book. His annual calibration wasn't just a technical measurement. It was an act of profound communal trust. The people trusted his skill, his integrity, and his deep connection to the water. They placed their survival, the fate of their gardens and their families, into his hands, literally. He was more than a technician. He was a mediator between the people and the earth, ensuring that the gift of the springs was distributed with wisdom and justice. Through him, the oasis didn't just survive. It thrived, a testament to a system that valued fairness, adaptation, and a deep respect for the source of all life. This way of life, this intricate dance between humanity and nature, holds powerful lessons for us today. In a world where resources are often seen as commodities to be exploited, the story of Siwa reminds us of a different path. It shows us that the most resilient systems are often those that are adaptive and built on principles of shared responsibility and equity. The Hassan, with his hands in the water, represents a form of wisdom. We have largely forgotten a wisdom that comes not from data sheets and algorithms alone, but from direct sensory connection with the world around us. He reminds us that managing our most precious resources requires not just technical skill, but also a moral compass and a sense of sacred duty. The water of Siwa was more than H2O. It was the lifeblood of a community, the flow of time, and a sacred trust held for generations to come. Imagine a world without spreadsheets, without databases, without a single line of code. Now, imagine trying to manage the most precious resource in that world, water. In the heart of the desert, where every drop is life, how do you ensure fairness? How do you keep records? How do you prevent conflict when survival itself is at stake? Today, we're traveling to the Siwa Oasis, a remote jewel in the Egyptian desert, to uncover a system of accounting so elegant, so ingenious, it was written on the very trees that gave the people life. This isn't just a story about irrigation, it's a story about trust, community, and a form of double-entry bookkeeping that predates modern computers by centuries, using nothing but a palm frond and a knife. In the Siwa Oasis, the allocation of water was more than just a logistical task. It was the community's most important recurring ritual. This wasn't a transaction that happened behind closed doors or in some dusty administrative office. It took place out in the open, under the desert sun, at the head of the main irrigation channel, where the lifeblood of the oasis began its journey. Picture this: all the heads of the families, the patriarchs of the community, gathered together. There's a quiet solemnity in the air, a shared understanding of the gravity of the moment. At the center of this gathering stands a figure of immense respect and authority. The husband, think of him as the watermaster, the judge, and the accountant, all rolled into one. He stands by the master gate, a simple but crucial sluice made of wood and stone that controls the flow of water from the main spring into the network of smaller channels that feed the palm groves. In one hand, he holds a fresh, green frond, cut from one of his own palm trees. This is the allocation frond, the master ledger for the entire oasis. In his other hand, he might hold a sharp knife, the tool of his unique trade. Beside him sits a water clock, a special bowl with a tiny hole in the bottom. When filled with water, it sinks at a known, predictable rate, marking the passage of time. But more often than not, the Hassan doesn't even need it. Years of experience have given him an innate sense of time, a connection to the rhythm of the water and the earth that is more accurate than any mechanical device. The ceremony begins. The Hassan's voice, clear and steady, cuts through the quiet anticipation. He calls out the names of the families, following an ancient roster, a sequence that has been honored for generations. House of El Shenawi, he might announce. The head of the El Shenawi family steps forward, acknowledging his turn. The Hassan continues. You're right. 18 notches from the East Branch on the third day. This is the family's prescribed share, their lifeline for the coming period. The representative nods in acceptance. There is no argument, no haggling. The system is trusted. With the announcement made, the Hassan opens the sluice gate. Water, cool and clear, rushes from the main channel into the specific canal leading to the El Shenawi family's groves. The sound of flowing water fills the air, a melody of prosperity and life. As the water flows, the Hassan watches the water clock, or perhaps he just closes his eyes, feeling the time pass in his bones. A skill honed over a lifetime. He is the guardian of fairness, ensuring that not a moment more or less than the allotted time is given. When the precise time is complete, he firmly closes the gate, stemming the flow. The Elshanawi's turn is over, but the ritual is not yet finished. Now comes the act of recording, the genius of this ancient system. The Hassan takes his knife and, with great ceremony and precision, he carves a series of small, grouped notches into the green allocation frond he holds. This isn't just a random set of marks, it's a specific pattern, a code unique to the House of El-Shenawi, representing their 18 units of water. This single frond, the master frond, will eventually be covered in these intricate patterns, a dense and beautiful tapestry of data representing the water distribution for the entire oasis for that cycle. This was only one half of the equation. Later, the Hassan would visit the El-Shenawi family's own palm grove. There, he would find a frond on one of their designated trees and make a corresponding, though simpler, mark. This second mark served as the family's personal receipt, a physical confirmation that their water rights had been fulfilled for that period. Think about what this is. This is double-entry bookkeeping of the most elegant and organic kind imaginable. You have a central ledger, the master allocation frond, which holds the aggregated data for the entire community. Then you have individual ledgers, the marks on each family's palm trees, which serve as personal receipts. The two systems can be cross-referenced at any time, creating an almost foolproof method of dispute resolution. Imagine a disagreement arises. A man from a certain family claims, "We did not receive our water on Wednesday. The channel was dry." Instead of escalating into a bitter feud, the process is simple and transparent. The Hassan would be summoned. He would retrieve the master allocation frond from that specific week. Unfurling it, he would point to the intricate patterns of notches. "See," he would say, "the marks for your house are here, right in the sequence where they should be." The water was allocated. The gate was opened. The evidence, created in a public ceremony witnessed by all the other family heads, is hard to refute. But the system provides a second layer of proof. The Hassan would then walk with the claimant to his own family's palm grove. He would point to the frond from that season, and "Look here," he would continue. "The fulfillment mark is here, on your own tree, confirming receipt. The evidence is consistent, physical, and undeniable. It's written not in ink that can fade or be altered, but carved into the living tissue of the palm itself." The case would be closed. The system's integrity would be reaffirmed, and community harmony would be preserved. Let's just pause here for a moment and really absorb the beauty of this. Close your eyes and envision that scene. The gentle crackle of a fire, perhaps, as we imagine this story being told by an elder under the vast desert sky. You can hear the sound of the flowing water, the lifeblood of the oasis. You can feel the intent, focused silence of the men as they watch the proceedings. You can hear the crisp, rhythmic sound of the Hassan's knife cutting into the fresh green frond. Each notch a promise, a contract, a piece of a larger puzzle. This was a society allocating its most vital resource with a level of transparency and inherent trust that is almost unimaginable in our modern, complex world. The very method of record-keeping was designed to build and reinforce that trust. This system did more than just manage water. It created a profound social harmony. Think about the implications. Your wealth, in this case, your access to water, was not a secret number in a bank account. It was recorded on a living tree, out in the open for all to see. This made hidden hoarding or theft of water practically impossible. Everyone knew what everyone else was entitled to, because the Hassan's role was built on a foundation of communal trust, and his methods were transparent. Grievances about the fairness of the share itself were incredibly rare. The ancient roster and the established rights were accepted as part of the natural order of things. The community's survival was directly tied to the integrity of this green mathematics. Every single person, every family, had a vested interest in ensuring the system remained honest and functional. This shared dependence bred a powerful, shared ethic. It was a form of accounting that acted as social cohesion. Every notch carved into that palm frond was like a stitch, binding the fabric of the community just a little bit tighter. It wasn't about numbers on a page. It was about relationships, responsibilities, and the collective will to survive and thrive together in a harsh environment. This Siwa system stands in stark contrast to our modern world of encrypted files, complex legal contracts, and digital security. While our systems are designed to protect against mistrust, the Siwa system was designed to foster trust itself. The public nature of the allocation, the physical, undeniable nature of the records, and the respected role of the Hassan all work together to create a self-policing, self-reinforcing loop of fairness. What can we learn from this? Perhaps it's a reminder that the most effective systems are not always the most technologically advanced. Sometimes, the most powerful solutions are rooted in simplicity, transparency, and a deep understanding of human nature and community dynamics. The people of Siwa didn't need blockchain to create an immutable ledger. They had a palm frond. They didn't need complex algorithms to ensure fair distribution. They had a trusted elder and a shared set of values. It is a powerful lesson in how ancient wisdom can offer profound insights into the challenges we face today. Whether it's managing resources, building communities, or simply finding ways to trust one another. The legacy of the Hassan and his allocation frond is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring power of a community bound together by a shared purpose and a simple, elegant piece of a palm tree. The system's ultimate test came not in plenty, but in scarcity. It was the moment the desert truly remembered its nature and sought to reclaim the green jewel at its heart. Every few generations, a drought would grip the oasis. The great springs would weaken, their song becoming a strained whisper. The stone-lined channels, once gushing with life, would run lower, their flow a mere trickle. The Hassan's annual calibration, usually a time of stable accounting, became an exercise in managing decline. The value of a notch, that fundamental unit of time and water, would shrink from generous minutes to mere moments. As the land grew parched, so did the hearts of its people. Tensions, normally smoothed over by the constant flow of water, began to rise like the heat shimmering off the sand. The air grew thick with unspoken fears and resentments. In such a time, a dispute of a different, more dangerous kind emerged. It wasn't about a missed payment or a faulty measurement. It was about the very foundation of their society. The question was no longer whether water was received, but over the hierarchy of rights when there simply was not enough for all. Imagine a family with ancient primary rights, their lineage stretching back to the very first settlers. They might stand and demand their full, legally recorded share, even if it meant a newer family. One with secondary rights, acquired through marriage or trade, received nothing at all. Their argument would be simple, cold, and based on the letter of the law carved into their palms. Our rights are oldest. Our share is absolute. The oasis faced a crisis that could shatter it from within, pitting neighbor against neighbor, turning the shared garden into a battlefield of entitlement. The fragile peace, woven over centuries, was threatening to unravel. In this moment of existential threat, the Hassan's role transformed. He did not merely administer the system, he was called to interpret its soul. He would call a council, not just of the heads of the most powerful families, but of all elders, representing every branch of the Oasis community. They would gather, their faces etched with worry, their eyes reflecting the thirsty land around them. But when he met them, he would not bring the ledger books. He would not unroll the scrolls of fronds that detailed the precise calculations of water shares. He would leave the instruments of mathematics and law behind. Instead, he would simply beckon them to follow. He would walk them through the grove, into the heart of their living library. He would lead the solemn procession of elders through the parched land. The channels, nearly dry, offered no comforting murmur. The fronds of the palms rustled with a dry, brittle sound. He would stop at the oldest trees, their trunks thick and gnarled with age, their skirts of dried fronds vast and layered like the rings of time. These were the patriarchs of the Oasis, silent witnesses to its entire history. Resting a hand on one ancient trunk, the Hassan would speak, his voice quiet but carrying in the still, hot air. "See this palm," he would say. "It was planted when our great-grandfathers first tamed this spring. Its fronds hold the original covenants, the first cuts that said, 'We will share this water so all may live.'" He would point to the markings on the oldest, most weathered fronds. The marks are simple. 2 wavy lines. They speak of survival, not of surplus. They speak of a desperate, foundational promise to each other. He would then move to a younger tree, one perhaps belonging to a family that had gained their rights through a marriage a century or two later. Their own history was impressive, but more recent. "See here," he'd continue, indicating the more elaborate carvings on its fronds. "The marks are more complex. They speak of trade, of dowries, of growth. They speak of a time of abundance, when water was plentiful enough to be a commodity." Then he would do something profound. He would reach down to the base of that younger tree, to the oldest and driest fronds, the ones that recorded its very first claim to the Oasis's lifeblood. He would pull them aside. "But look at the base," he would say, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The first mark on this tree, the one that gave this family life here, is a simple water symbol. It was not a purchase. It was not a contract. It was granted by the older family. It was a gift of life, not a sale of property." His reading of the palms was not an accounting audit. It was a history lesson in ethics. He was reminding them, through the undeniable evidence of the trees themselves, that all rights, no matter how complex or grand they had become, were ultimately derived from a single, foundational act of sharing for communal survival. The entire, intricate system of rights and privileges was built upon a bedrock of grace. In the grip of the crisis, he argued, the spirit of that first covenant must guide them. The complex laws of surplus were 4 times of surplus. The simple law of survival was 4 times of survival. He then proposed a temporary reversion, a return to that first principle. All shares, he declared, would be reduced, but not proportionally, where everyone loses the same percentage and the poorest lose the most in real terms. No, the reduction would be progressive. Those with the oldest, largest shares, the very families who felt most entitled, would take the greatest reduction. Their sacrifice would be the deepest. This was so that those with the smallest, most vulnerable shares, the newest families, the ones on the margins, would still receive enough water to keep their small gardens and their families alive. He framed it not as a loss of right or a punishment for their status. He framed it as the fulfillment of the deepest debt recorded in the oldest fronds, the debt to the future, the debt to the community that had allowed their own ancestors to flourish. It was their turn to extend the gift of life. Let's pause for a moment here. The fire crackles gently and the night breathes around us. Can you feel the weight of that decision hanging in the dry, tense air of the oasis? The Hassan, this keeper of a living library, used the historical record not as a weapon to enforce privilege, but as a scripture to preach solidarity. He showed them that their history was not a story of who owned what, but of who owed what to whom. The living library, in its most difficult hour, provided not just data, but wisdom. It answered the question not of what is legal, but of what is right. And the proposal, backed by the unassailable moral authority of the trees and their keeper, was always accepted. It had to be. It was accepted because it felt true to the story the oasis told about itself, a story that was literally growing in their midst, a story they could walk through and touch with their own hands. To deny the Hassan's logic would be to deny the very roots of their own existence. The drought, as all things do, would eventually pass. The rains would return to the distant mountains, and the springs would recover their strength, their song returning to the channels. And when the time of plenty returned, a new set of marks would be carefully added to the fronds of the great palms. These new marks would record not just the hardship of the drought, but the collective decision that ensured no palm and no family was allowed to wither completely. The system had proven itself. It had proven it could handle not just prosperity, but peril. And it could do so because it was rooted in something far deeper than numbers on a ledger or notches on a stick. It was rooted in a living, breathing covenant with the past and the future. It understood that a community is not just a collection of individuals maximizing their own gain, but a network of mutual obligation, a web of life where the strength of the whole depends on the survival of every part. The wisdom of the oasis was not just in how to share water, but in knowing why. It happened in the season of the hot, dry Khamsin winds, when the air itself feels like the breath of a furnace. A cooking fire, left untended in a moment of distraction, was caught by a gust and transformed into a fleeing demon of flame. The thatch of a nearby hut ignited, then another. The wind, howling through the narrow paths of the oasis, carried burning embers aloft and dropped them into the heart of the Hadakut al-Husn, the sacred grove. The date palms, their old fronds dry as tinder, caught fire with a sound that was likened afterwards to a great, collective screamer rapid, crackling whoosh that climbed from trunk to crown. Imagine a sound so sudden, so all-consuming, that it silences everything else. The gentle rustle of leaves, the quiet murmur of oasis life, all of it swallowed by this one terrible noise. This wasn't just a fire. It was an explosion of their world. The sacred palm grove, the heart of their community, became a towering inferno against the black desert sky. Orange flames raced up the ancient trunks, devouring the dry fronds in seconds. In the flickering, hellish light, you could see the silhouettes of people running, forming lines, passing buckets of water, their desperate efforts completely hopeless against the sheer scale of the blaze. The entire oasis rushed to fight it. People who had been sleeping, talking, sharing meals, were now united in a single, frantic purpose. They formed weeping lines from the springs to the grove, passing buckets of their precious water hand to hand. But their lifeblood was useless against such fury. The fire wasn't just burning trees. It was feeding on the very archive of their lives. Every knot, every notch on those fronds represented a piece of their history, a contract, a debt, a promise. They could only watch as generations of records turned to black ash that spiraled up into the starry sky, like dark ghosts escaping into the night. It must have felt like watching their own souls burn. By dawn, it was over. The fire had burned itself out, leaving a scene of utter desolation. The grove, once a symbol of life and continuity, was now a forest of blackened, skeletal trunks, smoking gently in the cool morning air. The vibrant green canopy was gone. The whispering library was silent, replaced by the awful, hollow sound of the wind whistling through the charred remains. It was the sound of a void, of absence. The Hassan, the old keeper of the grove, an old man by then, stood at the edge of the devastation. His face, usually full of wisdom and warmth, was ashen. He did not weep. He simply stared, as if looking at the ghost of his own life's work, at the erased memory of his people. That silent stillness can be more heartbreaking than any cry, can't it? It's the quiet that comes after the world has ended. He was looking at more than burned trees. He was seeing a future unwritten, a past erased. The immediate panic that followed was not just about loss, it was economic, it was visceral and practical. Without the fronds, how would they know who owed what? Who owned which water right for their crops? How would inheritances be settled? The intricate web of mutual obligation that held the entire Oasis community together seemed to have vanished in the smoke. Think about that for a moment. Every social and financial agreement, every handshake deal and long-term arrangement, all gone. Fear of chaos, of endless, bitter conflict, gripped the community. Whispers started to spread through the ash-filled air. Some said the fire was a punishment from the heavens, a sign of their failings. Others, more pragmatically, saw only a terrifying void where their history and their legal system had been. How do you rebuild a society when its foundational documents have been turned to dust? How do you trust your neighbor when the proof of that trust has been burned away? The stability they had taken for granted was gone, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Let's pause for a moment here. Close your eyes if you can. Imagine you're there, in the aftermath. The night is quiet now. Maybe a fire crackles gently nearby for warmth, quiet, friendly sound that serves as a haunting echo of the night's catastrophic roar. But the air is thick with the scent of wet ash and despair. It's a smell that gets into your clothes, your hair, your lungs. It's the smell of loss. And with that loss comes a strange and terrifying freedom. The freedom of a society whose entire ledger has been wiped clean. Every debt, every obligation, every old grudge, every deeply held right, gone. What would you do in that moment? Would you see an opportunity? Or would you feel the sheer terror of having no ground beneath your feet? This was the precipice on which the oasis now stood. For 3 days, a heavy blanket of mourning settled over the oasis. People moved like ghosts through their own homes. The shared grief, a palpable thing. The charred grove stood as a constant, smoking monument to their loss. They grieved, not just for the trees, but for the stories, for the certainty, for the very idea of who they were. It seemed like the end. But then, on the 3rd day, the old Hassan did something completely unexpected. Something that cut through the paralysis and despair. He sent word to the head of every family. His message was simple, but profound. He asked them to gather, not in the usual meeting house, not in the council chambers where disputes were normally argued. He asked them to gather, right here, in the heart of the destruction, amidst the scorched and skeletal remains of the grove. And he gave them specific instructions. He asked them to bring no papers, no ledgers from home, no fragments of evidence or old contracts. He asked them to bring no arguments, no claims, no demands. The time for that was over. The proof was gone. Instead, he asked them to bring only 2 things: their memories and their commitment to the truth. This was a radical act. He wasn't calling a meeting to decide the future. He wasn't there to arbitrate new laws or figure out a new system. He was calling a meeting to do something far more fundamental, far more powerful. He was calling a meeting to remember the past. Together, in the face of a void, he chose not to invent, but to recall. He was betting everything not on paper or law, but on the integrity of his people's shared memory. He was asking them to rebuild their entire world, not from the ground up, but from the inside out, using the only resource they had left, each other. The people gathered. They came hesitantly at first, shuffling through the ash, their faces etched with uncertainty. They stood among the blackened trunks, the silence broken only by the mournful wind. They looked at the old Hassan standing there, waiting. They didn't know what to expect. But in that moment, in that burned-out sanctuary, they were about to witness the birth of something new. Something born not from ink and fiber, but from trust and collective will. The true test of their community was about to begin. What happens when a society is forced to rely solely on its collective memory and honesty? The story of the Oasis was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Let us travel to the heart of an ancient oasis, to Siwa, a place steeped in tradition and mystery. We arrive not in its time of glory, but in the immediate, desolate aftermath of a catastrophe. Imagine, if you will, a grove of ancient palm trees, the very heart of a community's history and commerce, now reduced to a field of blackened, skeletal trunks. The air is thick and acrid with the smell of smoke and loss. This wasn't just any grove. It was a living library, a sacred archive. On the broad, sturdy fronds of these palms, the people of Siwa had for generations etched their most important records. Contracts, debts, land rights, genealogies, every thread that wove their society together. And now it was all gone, reduced to ash. The physical proof of their agreements, their history, their very social order had vanished in the flames. In a world without paper, without digital backups, what happens when the record is erased? For the people of Siwa, this was more than a tragedy. It was an existential crisis. How could they possibly rebuild? Where would they even begin? The answer would come not from a king or a scribe, but from a circle of elders sitting on the ashy ground in the shadow of their loss. They came, the elders of Siwa, and sat in a large circle on the ashy ground between the blackened trunks. Their faces were etched with grief, but also with a deep, quiet resolve. Among them sat the old Hassan, a man respected not for his authority, but for his wisdom and his share in the collective loss. He didn't sit on a raised platform or a special chair. He was simply a first among equals in grief. The silence was heavy, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the charred remains. Then Hassan spoke, his voice soft but carrying a profound weight. "The trees are gone," he said, his words acknowledging the raw pain they all felt. "The marks are ash." He paused, letting the finality of that statement settle. "But," he continued, "and this is where the story truly begins. The agreements were not made with the trees. They were made between us." He looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of his fellow elders. The trees only witnessed. He touched his own temple. "The memory of the witness is here." Then he gestured to the entire circle of men. And here, a new understanding began to dawn. "We will now rebuild the library, not in leaf, but in word. We will speak it back into existence." It was a breathtaking proposition. To reconstruct an entire society's legal and economic framework from memory alone. It seemed an impossible task, a monumental gamble against the fallibility of human recollection. Yet, in that circle of loss, it was the only path forward. Hassan knew they couldn't start with the biggest, most complex agreements. The weight of potential disputes would crush them before they even began. Instead, he chose a simple, elegant strategy. He began with the small things, the most recent transactions, the memories still fresh in everyone's minds. He turned to one of the men. "The family of Masood," he said, his voice clear and calm. "Last month, you bought a young donkey from the family of Wahib. Do you remember the price? The head of the Masood family, a man with a weathered face, closed his eyes for a moment in concentration. Then he spoke. 3 silver coins and 2 sacks of last year's dates. The statement hung in the air, a single thread of memory offered up to the group. The Hassan then turned to the elder of the Waheb family, the seller. Is this your memory? The Waheb elder listened, considered, and then nodded slowly. It is, and the dates were delivered the following week. The first thread was now anchored at both ends. But that wasn't enough. For the record to be truly solidified, it needed a third point of verification. Hassan scanned the circle, and his eyes landed on a third elder, a man with no family or business ties to either the Masouds or the Wahibs. You were present when the agreement was made, were you not? The third elder, a neutral witness, confirmed it without hesitation. Yes, I was. That was the price agreed. 3 independent memories, all in perfect alignment. The transaction was confirmed. Hassan did not scramble for a piece of charcoal or a surviving scrap of wood to write it down. He simply nodded. The act of communal vocalization and agreement was the new record. It was re-entered, not onto a palm frond, but into the living, breathing ledger of the community's consciousness. They proceeded this way for days, a slow, painstaking process of verbal reconstruction. The circle of elders became a permanent feature of the burnt grove. They moved from recent events to older ones, peeling back the layers of time, one transaction, one agreement at a time. They reconstructed complex water rights, a life or death matter in the desert oasis. How? Not by looking at a map, but by having each family recite their traditional allocation, day and time. We draw water on the 3rd day after the new moon, from sunrise until the shadow of the great rock touches the eastern wall. Another family would recite theirs, and another. Each statement was then cross-referenced against the memories of their neighbors and others in the circle. It was a human database, running on trust and shared experience. Of course, discrepancies arose. Memory is not perfect, after all. 2 families might remember the terms of a land swap from a decade ago slightly differently. One might recall the boundary line running along the old well, the other remembering it as 10 paces east of the well. This was the critical test of Hassan's system. In these moments, he did not act as a judge or an arbitrator. He wouldn't impose a decision. Instead, he would pose a simple, powerful question. Who else was close to this? Who tended the adjoining plot? Who was present at the harvest festival that year when the fathers first discussed it? Another elder, often from a family with no stake in the dispute, someone who merely overheard the conversation or helped measure the plot as a young man, would offer his recollection. And in every single case, this third-party, neutral memory resolved the discrepancy. It wasn't about one person being right and the other being wrong. It was about finding the consensus, the shared truth that lay dormant, distributed across the minds of the entire community. It was as if their collective memory was a self-correcting code, resilient and robust, far more so than any single, fragile document. Let's pause for a moment here. Close your eyes and picture this scene. The sun is setting, casting long shadows from the blackened palm trunks. A fire crackles gently in the center of the circle, its light flickering on the intent, focused faces of the elders. The night breathes around them. Can you feel the intensity of their collaboration? This wasn't a casual chat. It was a sacred, focused act of reconstruction. In this space, the spoken word, validated by the group, became more powerful, more solid than any inscription on stone or leaf. They were discovering something profound about themselves. They were learning that their shared life, their intertwined histories and relationships, was the true ledger. The real record wasn't in the grove, it was in the circle. This wasn't just about rebuilding a database of transactions. It was an act of profound community healing. With every confirmed memory, they were not just restoring a fact. They were reinforcing the bonds of trust and mutual reliance that had been shaken by the fire. They were reminding themselves that their society was built not on inanimate objects, but on each other. The process was the point. The act of remembering together was the act of becoming whole again. And as they worked, day after day, a profound realization dawned on them all, like the slow desert sunrise. The palm fronds, the physical records they had so mourned, had never been the primary archive. They were something else. They had been a mnemonic device, a physical prompt. Think of it like a public save button. The act of gathering, of watching an elder publicly cut the record of a transaction into a frond, was a ritual. That ritual was the true mechanism of recording. The public nature of the act, the shared focus on the physical object, is what etched the transaction into the community's collective consciousness, into the distributed network of their minds. The frond was simply the shared focal point that ensured all the individual memories were aligned and synchronized at the moment of creation. The true archive was the network of relationships, the web of trust, and the ritual of witnessing. The fire had burned the prompt, the physical reminder, but the memory itself, ingrained through years of ritual and shared experience, remained perfectly, miraculously intact. They weren't rebuilding from scraps and ashes. They were simply accessing a different kind of library, vocalizing a record that had always existed in parallel inside of them. This discovery transformed their understanding of who they were. Their culture, their knowledge, their laws. It wasn't something they owned. It was something they were. It lived in their stories, in their interactions, in the very structure of their community. The fire, in its devastation, had forced them to rediscover the most resilient technology they possessed, their collective human mind. This story from Siwa is more than just a fascinating piece of history. It holds a powerful lesson for our modern, digital world. We rely so heavily on external storage, on hard drives, on the cloud, on servers thousands of miles away. We trust our memories, our histories, and our agreements to fragile external systems. But what happens when those systems fail? What happens when the digital grove burns down? The elders of Siwa show us the enduring power of community, of shared trust, and of human connection as the ultimate backup. They demonstrate that a society's resilience isn't measured by the durability of its records, but by the strength of its relationships. Their story is a timeless reminder that the most important things, trust, agreement, history, identity, are not written on palm fronds or stored on silicon chips. They are written in the hearts and minds of people who choose to remember together. It's a testament to the idea that culture is not a thing to be stored, but an act to be lived. And in that living, in that sharing, it becomes unbreakable. After weeks and weeks of painstaking work, the circle had done it. They had, verbally, from memory alone, reconstructed the entire economic and social landscape of Siwa. Every single debt, every credit, every water right passed down through generations, every property boundary that defined their world. It was all there, held in the minds of the people. A scribe from the local mosque was finally brought in, a momentous occasion. His task was to transcribe this collective consensus onto paper. This was the very first time paper was ever used for such a purpose in Siwa. But here's the thing. The miracle wasn't the paper. It wasn't the ink drying on the page. The true miracle was what that page contained, or rather, what it didn't. When the reconstruction was complete, when every voice had been heard and every memory shared, there were no outstanding disputes. Not a single one. The consensus was perfect. This unbelievable outcome revealed the deeper genius of their system. It was never just an accounting system. It was something far more profound. It was a memory synchronization system. Think about that for a second. The role of the Hassan, the keeper of the grove, and the ritual of cutting the palm fronded wasn't just about making a note. It was a ceremony designed to ensure that every single transaction entered the community's collective memory in one single, agreed-upon form, right at the moment it happened. That piece of palm frond was the physical token of that synchronization, a tangible piece of shared reality. So when they gathered in the circle, they weren't trying to piece together conflicting accounts. They were simply accessing the perfectly synchronized memory they had all been meticulously building and maintaining for centuries. Discrepancies only ever came from the normal, imperfect recall of an individual. But the communal truth, verified by dozens of witnesses, and the neutral Hassan always emerged. And this is why the fire, the disaster that destroyed their library of palm fronds, was not a catastrophe for the system at all. In a strange and beautiful way, it was its ultimate validation. The fire proved that the system's true strength was never in the durability of the medium, not in the palm fronds themselves. The strength was in the robustness of the social process that surrounded them. Trust wasn't just a happy byproduct of the system. Trust was the system's very foundation, its engine, its soul. The Hassan wasn't merely a record keeper or a librarian. He was the conductor of a symphony of mutual memory, ensuring every instrument played in harmony. And the grove, that sacred space of blackened palm trunks, was never just a library. It was a living monument to that shared trust. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine the scene. The fire crackles gently in the cool desert night. The circle of elders has dispersed. There's a profound peace that settles over the oasis, the kind of peace that follows the realization of something unshakable. It's the knowledge that some bonds, the bonds between people, are stronger than fire. They're stronger because they are woven not from things, not from fronds or paper, but from shared intention, shared ritual and shared memory. It's a trust so deep it can withstand its own physical annihilation and emerge not just intact, but stronger, more understood. The quiet of the night is filled with this silent understanding. The system hadn't failed. It had proven itself beyond any doubt. The knowledge was safe, not on the fronds, but in the people. In the weeks and months that followed, something new began. From the charred, blackened bases of the old palm trees, new life started to emerge. Tender green shoots pushed their way up towards the sun, a sign of resilience, of nature's refusal to be defeated. A new grove was beginning. The paper record, the one so carefully transcribed by the scribe, was kept. It was a valuable document, a testament to their ordeal, and it was stored safely as a backup. But the people of Siwa, now armed with a profound understanding of their own traditions, gradually returned to the old ways. It wasn't a rejection of the new. It was an embrace of the true. A new, young Hassan was chosen and began his training, learning the ancient ways from the elders who had just proven their power. The cutting of the fronds resumed. The familiar snick of the knife echoed in the oasis once more. But now, the practice was infused with a new, deeper layer of meaning. Every cut, every notch, was understood not merely as creating a record, but as performing a sacred ritual of communal remembrance. Each frond was another thread being woven into the indestructible tapestry of their shared truth. They weren't just recording a transaction. They were reaffirming their bond to one another, synchronizing their collective memory in real time. The system had survived its own complete destruction. It had faced annihilation and emerged not weaker, but philosophically invincible. It would take a completely different kind of invasion, not of fire, but of photons and silicon, of data and networks to one day challenge the very soul of this incredible human system. But for now, in the quiet of the oasis, the symphony of memory played on, stronger and clearer than ever before. Decades flowed like water in the channels, and Siwa, once an isolated jewel, began to change. The old ways, shielded for centuries by the vast expanse of the desert, now felt the gentle but persistent push of the modern world. New roads, ribbons of asphalt laid over ancient camel tracks, brought with them not just goods, but tourists. These visitors, with their cameras and curious gazes, were a new kind of harvest for the oasis. Satellite dishes bloomed on rooftops like metallic flowers, pulling down the world's noise, its politics, its entertainment, its endless stream of information into the quiet courtyards of Siwan homes. The children were learning about things their grandparents had never even imagined. Alongside this cultural shift came an administrative one. The Egyptian government, in its grand project of national modernization, sought to formalize all land and property registries. Every plot, every well, every grove, from Alexandria to Aswan, was to be documented, catalogued, and entered into a single, unified, national database. And so, a team arrived from Cairo. They were the emissaries of this new digital age, to young software developers, sharp and eager, and a government liaison, a man who navigated the currents between tradition and bureaucracy. They came armed with the tools of their trade, laptops humming with processing power, scanners ready to inhale paper, and convert it into data, and a clear, well-defined mission to digitize the historic Siwa land records. They were polite, professional, and efficient. They set up a temporary office in a government building, the air conditioning a welcome respite from the desert heat, and prepared to begin their work. But almost immediately, they hit a wall. The local officials, when asked for the land registry, didn't point them to a dusty archive or a room full of ledger books. Instead, they pointed them towards the palm groves and spoke a single name. The Hassan, the team from Cairo was, to put it mildly, perplexed. They had budgeted time for sorting through old paper, for deciphering faded ink, for dealing with the charming inefficiencies of rural record-keeping. They had not budgeted for a single individual. They expected an old man, perhaps a venerable clerk with keys to a forgotten storeroom. When they found the Hassan, they found an old man. Yes, his face a beautiful map of wrinkles, his eyes holding the calm depth of the oasis springs. But he didn't lead them to an office. He led them to a grove. Imagine the scene, a stark, almost comical contrast. One of the young developers, clad in a crisp polo shirt and modern jeans, stands holding a sleek tablet. Its screen glows with the promise of order and data. He stands awkwardly, his city shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. Next to the Hassan, the old man is a figure from another time, dressed in the traditional flowing white robes of a Siwan elder, a simple turban on his head. All around them, the palm trees tower, their fronds rustling in the gentle breeze, the air thick with the sweet smell of dates and damp earth. The developer looks from the trees to his tablet and back again, his expression a perfect picture of confusion. He's a fish out of water, a coder in a cathedral of palms. This Hassan was the grandson of the man who had survived the Great Fire, the one who had seen the old library of fronds turn to ash. He was the last of his line, the final repository of knowledge, the last person to have been trained in the full, traditional, living art of the Pomfrond archive. He listened with immense patience as the government liaison explained the project. The liaison spoke of clarity, of preventing future disputes, of integrating Siwa into the modern Egyptian economy, of the benefits of a secure digital record. He spoke of progress. When he was finished, the Hassan nodded slowly, his gaze drifting up towards the canopy of leaves. "The record is already clear," he said, his voice soft but firm, carrying the weight of generations. "And it already prevents disputes. But," he added, a hint of a smile touching his lips, "I will show you." He turned and walked, his steps sure and familiar, deeper into the grove. The Cairo team followed, their modern equipment feeling heavy and useless. He stopped before a magnificent ancient palm, its trunk thick and gnarled, a patriarch among the trees. "This tree," the Hassan announced, placing a hand gently on its rough bark, "holds the history of the family of El-Miri. All of it. Since the time of my grandfather's grandfather, the developers stared at the tree. It was a beautiful tree, certainly, but it was just a tree." They looked at each other, then back at their tablet, its blank database fields waiting to be filled. The silence stretched. Finally, one of the developers, unable to bridge the gap between his world and this one, asked tentatively, "You need to scan the documents." The Hassan's smile widened. He gestured not to a hidden chest or a secret compartment, but to the hanging skirt of brown, dry fronds that clung to the tree's trunk just below its green crown. "The documents are there," he said. He reached up and gently lifted one of the dry, brittle fronds for the developer to see. Its surface was covered in a complex pattern of notches, cuts, and symbols. "But you cannot scan them," the Hassan continued, his eyes twinkling. "You must read them." And so began one of the most unusual data entry projects in history. It was a painstaking, almost sacred act of translation, a bridging of worlds. The Hassan, the living index, would select a frond. He'd trace a symbol with his finger, a mark that looked like a simple scratch to the untrained eye. "This," he would say, "means well, western side, shallow depth." The developer, hunched over his laptop, would type furiously, translating the poetry of the palm into the prose of the database. Asset, well, location, west. Depth, shallow. The Hassan would then point to a different part of the frond, a series of notches carved along the central spine. "These 5 on the left are a debt of 5 camel loads of salt incurred in the dry year when the springs were low." He'd then slide his finger across. "This single notch on the right, here, is the repayment made 3 years later, after the good rains." The developer, his brow furrowed in concentration, would try to fit this narrative into his rigid digital framework. He would create a linked database entry debt. EDN 47, uncreditor select, from list, amount. 5 camel salt, date, underscore, incurred, estimated, date, underscore, repaid, estimated. The process was agonizingly slow. Days turned into a week, then 2. The developers, used to the instant gratification of code and the clean logic of algorithms, grew deeply frustrated. They were trained to think in discrete, quantifiable data fields. They needed names, dates, GPS coordinates, exact monetary values. But the Hassan was giving them a story. He was giving them a living context, a web of relationships where everything was connected. For the Hassan, the date of a transaction wasn't a number on a calendar. It was the physical age of the frond itself, its position in the layered skirt of the tree. The creditor or owner was on a name to be selected from a drop-down menu. It was understood by the very tree the record was carved on. This was the El-Miri tree, so the record belonged to them. The amount of a debt wasn't just a number. It was implied by the depth and the placement of the cut, its relationship to other marks on the frond. This wasn't just data. It was an ecosystem of information embedded in a living organism. Each frond was a chapter, and each tree was a volume in a library that grew, aged, and recorded history in real time. The developers had come to capture a static snapshot of the past. But they found that the past in Siwa was not a fixed point. It was a living, breathing thing, rustling in the wind, and its language was not one of zeros and ones, but of notches and fronds, and the patient memory of a very old man. The challenge wasn't just to digitize the records, it was to translate an entire worldview. As the days turned into weeks, a fundamental rift became clear. It was a clash of worlds, a gap in understanding that seemed as wide as the desert itself. The developers, brilliant in their own right, saw a database to be built. They saw data points, tables, and algorithms. But the Hassan, he saw a symphony to be understood. He saw a living, breathing story woven into the very fibers of the palm tree. He tried to bridge this gap, to explain the layers of meaning, the nuances they were missing in their quest for digital efficiency. He would take them to the palm, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns of notches. He showed them to debt notches that, to the untrained eye, looked identical. Look closely, he'd say, his voice a low, patient hum. This one, he pointed, it has a slight curve at the bottom. This isn't just a mark, it's a story. It means this was a debt of necessity, a debt incurred during sickness, perhaps to buy medicine or to see a family through a hard time. The other one, see how it's perfectly straight. That's a business debt. A loan for a new tool, an investment in a herd. The Hassan looked from the notch to the young developer's face, searching for a spark of comprehension. This matters, he insisted. It tells you about the relationship between the people involved. It speaks of the moral weight, the community's understanding of the circumstances. The developer, earnest and trying his best, typed into his laptop. On the screen, a form appeared. He created a field, DEBT type, followed by 2 blinking question marks. Below it, he added a comment field and typed possible contextual nuance. The story of sickness and compassion, of risk and enterprise, was reduced to a footnote, a ghost in the machine. Then, the Hassan led them to the master water allocation frond. It was a breathtakingly complex tapestry of grouped marks, a visual ledger of the community's lifeblood. This pattern here, he said, his finger tracing a set of 4 distinct notches intersected by a single, sharp dash. This tells us the family of Barakot received their 4 units of water. But the dash tells us it was during the week of the great sandstorm. The flow from the well was weak, choked with dust. This dash is an acknowledgement, a shared understanding that the 4 units delivered were not the full, strong measure they should have been. It was a partial fulfillment, accepted by all, with nature's intervention understood and forgiven. The developer stared at the pattern, then back at his screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. How do you code forgiveness? How do you quantify a shared experience of a sandstorm? He created a new table, water rights log. He entered the data he could grasp. Family, units allocated. For the amount delivered, he hesitated, then typed estimated 3.5. Beside it, in the notes column, he added sandstorm impact. The Hassan watched this translation happen in real time. A profound sadness settled in his eyes. The digital record captured the quantity, or at least a guess at it. But it lost the story. It lost the acknowledgement, the communal grace, the shared understanding of natural variance that the simple dash represented so elegantly. But perhaps the greatest, most untranslatable element of all was time itself. In the world of the database, time was a simple, linear construct. It was a date on a calendar, a time stamp accurate to the nanosecond. It was neat, orderly, and abstract. But on the palm, time was a physical, organic process. It was a position on a growing, living tree. To see if a debt was old, you didn't look at a date. You looked at how far down the trunk its frond was. You observed the color of the leaf itself, how deep a shade of brown it had turned with age, how brittle its edges had become. To understand a family's journey, their fortunes and misfortunes over generations, you read vertically, from the fresh green fronds at the crown down to the weathered, ancient ones near the base. The tree told a story of growth, of history stacked upon history. The digital record, in stark contrast, was just a list. It was a flat, two-dimensional table that could be sorted by date, by name, by amount. But it was fundamentally disconnected from this biological timeline. The database had chronology, but it lacked the visceral sense of growth. It contained entries, but the entries themselves never aged. The Hassan tried to explain this profound difference. He gestured from the towering palm to the glowing laptop screen. On the tree, he said, his voice laced with a quiet frustration. A debt from your grandfather's time sits physically under the debts of today. You see its age. You feel the weight of that history as you look up the trunk. On your screen, it is just another line in a list. It might be at the bottom or at the top if you sort it that way, but it has no weight. It has no age. It's just another line. The developer stared at the sterile list of transactions on his screen. His expression, a mixture of confusion and a dawning, uncomfortable awareness. He then looked back at the palm, at the vertical story etched into its very being, and for a moment he glimpsed the chasm between his world of data and the Hassan's world of meaning. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine the scene. The desert night is closing in, the sky a deep, star-filled indigo. A small fire crackles, its embers casting a warm, dancing light on the faces of the Hassan and the young developers. The only other sound is the soft, rhythmic breathing of the night air. What we're witnessing here is a quiet tragedy. It's the tragedy of translation. It's the inevitable, heartbreaking reduction of a living, storied, three-dimensional world of meaning, a world rich with context, emotion, and shared understanding, into a flat, two-dimensional grid of cells. It is the loss of the curve in the notch that signifies compassion. It's the loss of the dash that represents a shared hardship. It is the loss of the deep, telling brownness of an aging leaf. All of it smoothed out, flattened, and filed away into the cold, sterile logic of a database. It's the story of what we gain in efficiency and what we risk losing in soul. And yet, something remarkable began to happen. The developers, for their part, started to change. Their initial confidence, their belief in the absolute power of their digital tools, began to soften. It was replaced by a dawning, profound respect. They started to see that they weren't just capturing data points, they were attempting to preserve the fossils of a logic, an ancient and intricate way of thinking that they did not, and perhaps could not, fully comprehend. They realized they weren't building a perfect digital replica. They were building a shadow of the system, a ghost in their own machine. They had arrived with the mission to digitize records, to bring this ancient system into the 21st century. But, in the process, they were being taught a powerful lesson. The records themselves, the notches and the marks, were the least important part of the whole equation. The true system wasn't the data, it was the entire process surrounding it. It was the ritual of carving the notch in the presence of witnesses. It was the shared public space where the palm stood, accessible to all, its information transparent. It was the living, growing, changing medium of the tree itself. That was the system, and that, they finally understood, they could not capture. They couldn't write code for communal trust. They couldn't create a field for the sacredness of a promise. All they could do was point to its absence, to acknowledge the rich world of meaning that existed beyond their grasp, in a simple, humble comment field. The project was no longer about replacement. It had become an act of preservation, a tribute to a world they had only just begun to see. On the final day, the old Hassan took the lead developer, a thoughtful young man named Karim, for one last walk in the grove. The work was functionally complete. The intricate database, which now held the community's history, was populated with the best approximations they could manage. It was stored securely on a server in Cairo, backed up in the cloud. In theory, it was safe from fire, from drought, from time itself. But as they walked, the Hassan was not relieved. He was grieving. The project was finished, but something essential had been lost. He stopped at a young, healthy palm, its fronds still a vibrant green, unmarked by the passage of time or the stories of its people. This tree, the Hassan began, his voice raspy with emotion, was planted for a child born last year. He ran a hand over the smooth bark. In the old way, when she grew and married, or made her first significant trade, we would come here, to her tree. I would make the first cut. Her story would begin to grow, right here, on this living thing. Her children would one day come and see it. They would touch the mark of their mother's first success, a tangible piece of their heritage. He paused, turning his gaze to Karim, his eyes filled with a deep, unsettling sadness. Now, what will happen? Someone will sit in an office, maybe miles away, and type on a keyboard. A line of code will appear in your database. Where will her children go to see their history? Will they huddle around a glowing computer screen? Will they look at a printed paper from some government ministry? He shook his head slowly, the gesture carrying the weight of generations. A tree, you see, it grows, it changes. The mark ages with it. The story becomes part of something living, breathing, connected to the earth. Your database, it does not grow. It only stores. In that moment, the full weight of their creation crashed down upon Karim. He understood with a chilling clarity. They had preserved the data. Yes, they had catalogued the numbers and the names. But in doing so, they had inadvertently ended the practice. They had frozen a living, evolving system in time and placed it behind the digital glass of a museum. The living dialogue between the community, the Hassan, and the Palmza conversation that had spanned centuries would now fade into silence. Future transactions, future life events would be entered directly into the digital void. They would be unwitnessed by the rustling leaves of the community grove, unritualized by the sacred cut of a knife, and completely unconnected from the earth that had sustained them for so long. The database wasn't a seed for the future. It was a tombstone for the past. The Hassan held out his hand, palm up, empty. It was a hand that knew the texture of bark, the weight of a tool, the feel of the desert wind. It was a hand that had recorded history onto living wood. Then, imagine the stark contrast, the glowing screen of a smartphone, displaying a neat, sterile, digital land registry form. The living, wrinkled hand versus the cold, impersonal interface. This was the trade they had made. The fire, the Hassan said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. It showed us that the memory was always in us, in our minds. In our traditions, he was referring to the catastrophe that had spurred this whole project. The fire that had threatened to destroy the physical records on the trees. But this new fire, the electric one, he continued, gesturing vaguely towards the unseen world of servers and data. It tells the memory to go live in a machine. And when memory goes into a machine, it forgets the people. The machine does not need trust. It does not need a circle of elders to verify a story. It only needs electricity. He finally looked directly at Karim, his expression one of infinite, weary sadness. You have saved the numbers, but you have buried the story. Let's just pause here for a moment. Can you feel it? The profound melancholy of that final walk. The heartbreaking understanding that some forms of progress are also forms of burial. It's a powerful reminder that efficiency can come at the cost of meaning, and that preservation, when it separates a tradition from its living context, can sometimes be the first step towards oblivion. The goal was to save the library, but in the process, they had stopped it from ever acquiring new books. Karim returned to Cairo, the Hassan's words echoing in his mind. The database went online. It was hailed as a monumental success, a shining example of a community stepping into modernity. It was celebrated in articles and reports, but back in the oasis, the old Hassan continued to walk his grove, tending to trees that would likely never receive another meaningful mark. He had become the last librarian of a living library that had officially closed its doors to new stories. The accounts of the people, their triumphs and milestones, were now settled in a distant realm of light and silicon, far from the cooling shade of the palms and the familiar, grounding sound of the knife carving into wood. The oasis had gained a backup, a failsafe against disaster. But in the silence of the now unmarked trees, one couldn't help but wonder if it had lost its soul. The story doesn't just end there, with that sad, final walk. It continues in the silent, daily life of the oasis. Weeks turned into months. The initial praise for the digital system faded into the background hum of daily life. For the younger generation, the transition was almost seamless. They pulled out their phones, logged into the new system, and registered land transfers or business deals with a few taps. It was fast, it was clean, it was modern. There was no need to seek out the Hassan, no need to gather witnesses, no need for the slow, deliberate ritual under the desert sun. Convenience had won. Karim, back in his Cairo office, would sometimes pull up the database. He'd look at the new entries appearing neat, uniform rows of text and numbers. Each line represented a life event, a marriage, a birthright, the sale of a harvest. But they were just data points. They lacked the texture, the story, the humanity of the carvings he had so meticulously photographed and catalogued. He remembered tracing a deep, weathered cut on an ancient palm, and a Hassan telling him it represented a family's survival through a great famine 3 generations ago. The mark was deep because the hardship was deep. The tree itself was gnarled and tough, as if embodying the resilience of the family it represented. How could a line of code, a string of ones and zeros, ever convey that? He had tried to build in a notes section into the database, a place where stories could be added. But it was rarely used. Who had the time? And who was the official storyteller now? The system was designed for efficiency, not for narrative. The digital form had fields for date, transaction type, and parties involved. It did not have a field for meaning. One day, Karim received a call from a young man in the oasis. He was the son of a family whose land dispute had been one of the first cases settled using the old, traditional method, a story carved into their family tree. Now, a new dispute had arisen with a neighbor over a water access point. The young man was confused. "We looked in the new system," he said, his voice tinny over the phone. "The record is there. It says we have rights. But the neighbor says his father remembers it differently. In the old days, we would go to the Hassan. He would look at the trees, yes, but he would also talk to the elders. He would remind us of stories of our grandfathers, how they cooperated. The solution wasn't just about who was right, it was about how we could continue to live together. Now, what do we do? Show him the phone screen? It feels empty. There is no wisdom in it." Karim had no answer. He had delivered a system that provided answers, but not wisdom. He had created a repository of facts, but had dismantled the process that generated harmony. The machine didn't need trust, as the Hassan had said, but the people did. They needed the rituals, the shared space of the grove, the mediating voice of the elder who held not just the records, but the collective memory and social fabric of the community. The old Hassan, meanwhile, became a more solitary figure. He still tended the trees, his love for them undiminished. He was no longer a judge or a historian, but simply a gardener. Children would sometimes follow him, and he would tell them the old stories, pointing to the marks on the trees. He would show them the scar of a great flood, the cluster of notches for a family with many sons, the faint, almost healed line of a forgotten betrothal. He was trying to keep the soul of the oasis alive, even as its body was being rewired. He was speaking a language the trees understood, but that the new world was forgetting how to hear. The story of the Hassan and Karim is a quiet tragedy of the modern age. It's a fable about what we gain and what we lose on the road to progress. We build systems to protect our heritage from the flames, only to find that we built a fireproof box that suffocates the very life it was meant to preserve. The data of the oasis was saved, secure in its server in Cairo. But the story, the living, breathing, growing story, was left behind, to fade slowly with the last man who knew how to read the trees. The greatest irony was that in their quest to save the memory of the oasis from being lost, they had created a system that would ensure future memories would never be made in the same meaningful way again. The grove of living history had become a park of silent monuments. And so, our quiet journey to the Siwa Oasis reaches its end. The embers of our fire glow with a softer light now, much like the last warmth of a desert sunset. We have walked through a library of living green, a place where every palm leaf is a page, and every groove in the bark is a line of text. We've learned the mathematics of water, a language written in simple notches, a system of fairness and survival. We witnessed a community remember itself out of ashes, rebuilding not just structures, but the very fabric of their shared history. And we felt the gentle sorrow of an ancient knowledge meeting its modern digital shadow. The date palm accountants of Siwa, as we've come to know them, taught us something profound about the nature of value and memory. They showed us that a record doesn't have to be a cold, lifeless entry in a database. It can be a living, breathing thing, completely integrated into the very ecosystem it describes. They demonstrated that trust isn't a soft, optional addition to a system, but its hardest, most essential infrastructure. This trust wasn't built on encryption or passwords. It was forged through shared ritual, public witness, and generations of promises kept. Their system wasn't just accounting. It was so much more. It was ecology, sociology, and spirituality woven into one seamless practice. When the Great Fire swept through, it didn't just burn records. It revealed the true heart of their system. The community itself was the ledger. The shared memory, the collective responsibility, was the backup. The knowledge wasn't stored in a single, vulnerable place. It was distributed among the people, held in their hearts and minds. This encounter with the modern world, with the introduction of digital record-keeping, leaves us with a quiet, lingering question. It's not a simple question of right or wrong, but a more nuanced one about what is lost and what is gained in our relentless march toward efficiency. The digital record is undeniably precise, seemingly permanent, and incredibly efficient. It can be accessed from anywhere, duplicated infinitely without loss of quality. But does it have a shadow? Does a spreadsheet smell of palm sap and damp earth after a rain? Can a child run their fingers over a screen and feel the same connection as tracing their grandfather's promise carved into a tree? The sadness we saw in Hassan's eyes wasn't just nostalgia for an old way of doing things. It was a sadness for the end of a conversation, a rich, multi-generational conversation between people. A conversation mediated by a living tree and conducted in the slow, patient language of growth and scars. Each mark on the palm was a word. Each year's growth, a new sentence. It was a dialogue that required patience, presence, and a deep connection to the land. As the final wisps of smoke from our fire dissolve into the vast desert night air, let's hold on to that image of the green grove, that living library. Let us remember that there are ways of knowing and ways of remembering that are not necessarily faster, but are undeniably deeper. They aren't more portable, but they are more rooted, tethered to a place and a people in a way a file on a server can never be. The story of Siwa is a whispered reminder, a gentle suggestion that before we rush to store our information, our histories, and our values, we should pause and ask a fundamental question. What story does the storage itself tell? Does the medium we choose speak of control, of centralized authority, and of abstract data points? Or does it speak of covenant, of promises made between people? Does it encourage isolation, or does it foster community? The palms of Siwa still rustle in the gentle breeze, their leaves whispering secrets to the stars. Somewhere, on a distant server, data about water rights and harvests now rests in silent, ordered rows. And here, in the heart of the desert, the quiet wisdom of the oasis endures. It's an enduring wisdom that asks us to consider, with great care, where we choose to plant the seeds of our collective memory. The night is deep and still. The story is complete. You are under baobab skies.